Israel, ancient, the birthplace of Judaism and Christianity. Gaza, a failed state run by a terrorist organization called Hamas, an Islamic extremist group funded by Iran. What about the Palestinians? In 2005, Israel kicked out its own people to give them Gaza. Instead of peace, they got war. The issues are complex, but you won't believe what Hamas is really doing to its own people until you watch The Truth About Gaza, now playing on Vimeo. A 20-minute short film by Richard Shaw. They targeted a school bus.
They targeted a yellow school bus.
We actually had somebody come up to the fence and ask one of the soldiers to shoot him.
Hello and welcome to ATN World News. I'm Leah, and it's great to be with you, the audience around the world. Today we have back with us our ATN World News teammate, film producer, and now he's doing VODs, video on demands, Richard Shaw. He's an author and a lecturer, and he has done a recent video on demand that's very well needed on the borderlines, the Gaza Strip, Hamas, what really took place during the celebration of the embassy move to Jerusalem for the U.S. In this video on demand, Rick talks with Dan Gordon, who is still an IDF member and was there at the front lines. He talks with him and several other experts. It's a very well done and well needed video. With that, I want to say good afternoon, Rick.
Hi, Leah. It's a pleasure to be on. We really need to get this film out to the maximum number of people, so your help is greatly appreciated, and I say that sincerely.
I tell you, Rick has been so involved with Israel, deeply. He's done the famous work, Torah Codes into Darkness. He's been to Israel several times. He has several connections. He's done a TV piece for us with Avi Lipkin, and we've had Glazerson on, Rabbi Glazerson. He's very much involved with Israel. So, Rick, go ahead and tell us about what's really going on with Hamas and the Gaza Strip.
Well, Dan Gordon and I are working on another project together, and he happened to mention to me that he was about to leave for Israel. This was a couple weeks ago. And I said, what you going there for? Because I knew that Dan was still in the IDF. He's a reserve officer in a combat infantry unit with the IDF. And even though he's older, he's still doing this. And he also has been a spokesperson for many years, but his title has changed a bit. So, as you know, in the U.S. and also in Israel, there is a leftist news media that tend to twist the facts. But I don't think it's quite as bad in Israel as it is here in the States. But what was really bugging me was the fact of the kind of reporting we were getting of what was really happening at the Gaza Strip. And when I heard it, I knew that wasn't the case at all. They made it sound like Israel was just arbitrarily in there shooting people. And, woe are the poor Palestinians. And so it really irritated me and upset me that this was the kind of reporting we were getting from our own news media. So when Dan got back, he agreed to do a Skype interview. Now, look, this is basically kind of low fidelity compared to my normal productions, but it was the information I was interested in. So Dan Skyped me from his home in Sedona, Arizona, and I was able to talk with him for a long time, but I put the best of what he pulled me into this film that we're selling for $1.25 on Vimeo just to kind of help recoup production costs a bit. And then I also had footage that no one has ever seen that I shot in Israel a couple years ago when we were there doing the Torah Code film. And I didn't use it in the Torah Codes because at the time it had nothing to do with the Torah Codes topic, but I hung on to it because I thought it was so interesting. And those two interviews are with Shai Hermesh, formerly with the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. He was a paratrooper in his younger days, but he had Palestinian friends that he was trying to help. And then there is Sarah Tillock, who actually lives on the border at a kibbutz there behind concrete barricades because Hamas was shooting mortars across the street, one targeting a school bus and killed a little kid going to school one morning. So this is really what's going on, that the media will not report about Israel because they're not on Israel's side, and we are. Having been there 4 times now, I've rarely experienced such hospitality any place I've ever been in my life, and I know that what they're experiencing is an attack on them. They're defending themselves. So you want me to go ahead and get into the facts of the situation?
Sure, go ahead and do that for us, Rick.
Well, Dan was stationed on an area that they called Sniper Hill, which was just a few meters from the actual fence. Now, for people who don't know, a few years ago, Israel installed a fence between the Gaza Strip and the rest of Israel. And it was because they were having constant incursions of terrorist attacks, knifings, suicide bombers, things like that. In fact, when I was there in Israel in 2015, a couple trips ago, there's a beautiful train that takes you around town that looks like a monorail from the future, like you'd almost see at Disneyland, and that's what's running through Jerusalem. But the train platforms are very modern, and there is a platform near the Damascus Gate as you get off there to go to visit Jerusalem. And the day after we were at that very same platform, someone was stabbed, and that was going on. There were these. They called it the stabbing intifada, and it was basically going on around 2015 and into 2016, and where it was really kids and young adults, Palestinians, that were incited by Islamic clerics to go into Israel and arbitrarily kill Jews. That's really what was going on. And of course the IDF had to get a handle on that, which they did. And then there was, you might remember back a few years ago, that there were terrorists that were exploding bus bombs in Israel and that type of thing. And that led to Israel being forced to give up the Gaza Strip to the Palestinians. So this idea that there needs to be a two-state solution is all bogus, because there already is a two-state situation. The Palestinians have the Gaza Strip in Israel, and the Jews have Israel. And it's been that way since 2005, and that was instigated by Ariel Sharon, who I believe did a great disservice to Israel by doing this, because now they've got a worse situation. They're surrounded on all sides by enemies, where before they weren't. They had isolated terrorist attacks at restaurants and buses and everything else. But Ariel Sharon wanted peace and was willing to give up land. And a group of rabbis got together and put a curse on him. I'm not kidding you. This really happened. A group of Kabbalistic rabbis got together, cursed Ariel Sharon, and one of them stood up at a podium, and I can't find this clip anymore. It's been erased from the internet. But he said, Ariel Sharon will fall into a deep sleep and never wake up. And just a few weeks later is exactly what happened. He was in a coma for 8 years and 8 days.
I always found that, I don't know, pretty eerie, don't you think?
Oh, it's very, very weird. I mean, I don't know what to make out of it, but it really happened. It's just typical of the strange supernatural element that's in Israel, because you have a very heavy Orthodox Jewish presence there, and then you've got Christians there too. And Israel doesn't find the Christians to be a threat to what they're doing. And I have many Orthodox friends, and they put up with me. We have a great relationship and much love towards each other. So we've learned how to deal with each other's various views on faith. But there are these really ultra-Orthodox sects in Israel that are pretty extreme. And, they still try to follow the Torah like the letter of the law, which that's their prerogative to do that. But, of course, our belief tells us that when Yeshua came in, he kind of changed a lot of things. Not that he threw out the Torah, but there's a lot of things that he did that made some of those laws no longer as important as they once were. But in any case, Israel is still God's territory. It's his land. We don't know why he picked it. We don't know why all of that happened. But when we look back in history, Israel was the epicenter of everything that happened that really has helped hold this world together as far as doing something that is peaceful and with kindness. And of course, that has been polluted and perverted through the years. I mean, the whole situation, the Vatican now, everything with the Catholic Church and their persecution of the Jews is still on their minds, and it was wrong. But that's what a lot of the orthodoxy in Israel still thinks a Christian is. That's why there's so much resistance to it, because they remember what happened. So anyway, Dan Gordon was stationed on an area called Sniper's Hill, where they had to basically sit with their weapons drawn, aiming at possible Hamas martyrs, they call themselves, that were lining up against the wall to try to break through this fence that was protecting Israel. There were 40,000 Palestinians that were at this fence, and only 2,000 IDF soldiers. They had aerial reconnaissance. They have these, basically they're balloons that have cameras on them where they keep tabs on what's going on at the fence, monitor the entire Gaza Strip. We know that Hamas is still building tunnels under Israel to try to invade. There were people throwing Molotov cocktails, grenades, firing live fire at the IDF through the fence, and also trying to destroy the fence. So they had people with ropes attaching to it and dragging portions of the fence away. It's basically like barbed wire, and it's a metal fence that you can see through. And so they were trying to break through it and invade Israel. And there's 40,000 of these Palestinians. When it gets right down to it, this whole demonstration, it was not a peaceful one in the slightest bit. It was a violent demonstration with a lot of the Islamists yelling Allah Akbar and waving machetes in the air and this type of thing. Some of that is in my film. And when you see all of that, and if you knew that was a mile from your home, you would be concerned, because they want to come in and kill you, essentially. So the mainstream media put out an article that said that 60 Palestinians demonstrators were killed by the Israeli forces. Well, later it came out that 50 of those 60s were Hamas terrorists. They weren't peaceful demonstrators in any stretch of the imagination. And the only reason the other 10 were killed was because they were huddled around the ones that were throwing grenades and Molotov cocktails and shooting at the IDF. And the way that works is that the IDF soldiers actually have cameras on their weapons, and they can actually beam back a signal to their CO and say, we'd like permission to fire because thus and thus is going on. And they have to get permission from headquarters before they can do anything. And so once Hamas started shooting at the IDF, a lot of the Palestinians scattered knowing that there would be some action taken against them, which was a good thing for them. But what's really interesting and what most people don't realize is that the people that were demonstrating were paid by Hamas to be there. Families got $100 a piece. So you can imagine if there's 40,000 people and say half of them got $100 for being there, that's a lot of money. And we know that Iran is funding Hamas. And thanks to Obama, they've got a ton of money to work with. And then if a Palestinian happened to get shot during this demonstration, Hamas would pay him $250. Hamas would also put up the women and children on the front lines because they would tell everyone, well, the IDF won't fire at a woman or children. So they would be up there, and that would be shielding what the Hamas terrorists were actually doing. And they set tons of tires on fire to act as a smokescreen for what they were doing to cover. And of course, the IDF couldn't see through that smoke. So, and it's funny that none of there's no mention of the problems that Hamas is creating with the atmospheric environment by lighting tons of rubber tires on fire and creating toxic smoke covering the area. And Dan told me, he said it got into his hair and turned it darker. Said it made him look younger. But he can't get it out of his hair. He's washed his hair many times, and he's got this black smoke that kind of went in there. And it got down in their lungs and everything else, and it can make you sick. So Hamas was doing that. They were also sending up what they called fire kites. Now this is primitive, but it was effective. They had kites that had Nazi swastikas emblazoned on them. These are like normal paper kites, and then dangling from them was an incendiary device. And so what they would do, they would put this kite up in the air and get it over a wheat field or something that Israel was growing, and then they would let it fall and set the field on fire. We show that in the film as well. And they did that to many fields up and down the Gaza Strip to try to, hurt the settlers in Israel. And this is just only like the tip of the iceberg. But we know that back when I was there, one of the first times in Israel, I guess it was my second trip to Israel, was in the fall of 2014. It was a week after the previous Hamas war, and they had just had a ceasefire. I would have gone in whether they were still firing or not, because I'm really not afraid to be in Israel, because I feel like God protects us while we're there. But they had sent up some 4,500 rockets, and of the kind where I was showing you, this is actually a piece of a Hamas rocket that's actually been exploded. And you can see like the threads on it, and because it was irrigation pipe that Israel gifted them to help with their agricultural projects, and Hamas turned it into rocket parts. and they use a liquid propellant, and then they have a payload in the front. And I've seen these rockets after they've exploded, and the metal, while it's really thick on these rockets, is just rippled down the sides. They're split open and rippled. And the only way that can happen is if the rocket gets super hot, where the metal is fatigued from that. And then when they explode, they send out these shards of red hot material at 600 miles an hour. And they go through walls, people's bodies, everything else. So the only good thing about the rockets is that they have no guidance system, so they fall randomly. Where they try to aim them in a general direction, some fall in fields, some hit a house, and others, But they shot up 4,500 rockets during the 2014 incursion, and the media doesn't report on that. So far, over time, since I guess 2000. 10,000 rockets have been fired into Israel. And not only that, Hezbollah has 150,000 rockets aimed at Israel now. And Hezbollah is in Lebanon. And this is why Israel has been bombing military bases of Iran in Syria, because they don't want every single country along their border to have designs on trying to come in and destroy Israel. And they already have had one drone carrying weapons from Iran fly over northern Israel, and the IDF took it out, obviously. But I believe that there's still going to be some kind of major incursion, and my hat's off to Donald Trump for doing what he's done with Jerusalem. It was about time that happened, and none of our other presidents had the guts to do it. And it's really kind of silly, because obviously Jerusalem has been the capital in more than just namesake for decades. I mean, that's where the Knesset resides. That's where Bibi Netanyahu's house is. That's where the main Antiquities Museum in Jerusalem is in Jerusalem. The Temple Mount. I mean, all these areas are really, that's really the capital of Jerusalem, and Tel Aviv, while it's a really beautiful modern city with lovely beaches, isn't really the capital. So I'm really glad that's happened. But that just inflamed Hamas, as I'm sure they all knew would happen. But they were willing to cope with it, and they've done a great job. For there only to be 60 people killed in such a violent uprising out of 40,000 demonstrators, I think that is really saying something.
It definitely is. Even what seems like a small part is, to me, the most major telling thing is that here Israel wants to help them with irrigation, sends them as a gift, free irrigation where they can grow food for their people, but they want to use it as a bomb to kill Jews.
Right. And they also, Israel sent bags of cement that the IDF has found in tunnels, and Hamas was using it to build tunnels with.
Anything you give them, they want to use to destroy the Jew.
Right. And they also, there was a natural gas line and electrical power line coming from Israel into Hamas that has been there for some time, because Gaza is a failed state. Dan basically points this out in my interview with him. They're basically running raw sewage into the Mediterranean Sea. There's very little drinking water that's pure enough to drink. They only have 3 hours of electricity per day. And I mean, this is weird, because when Israel was running the place, it was a modern city. High-rise buildings, beautiful houses. I mean, out here in the West Coast, there's this really super expensive neighborhood. It's called Rancho Palos Verdes. It's basically right on the coast. And in fact, Donald Trump, before he was president, and built a golf course there. And that's what the houses by the sea in Gaza once looked like, with the beautiful tile roofs and all of that stuff. It was a beautiful place, and Hamas has destroyed it. And all that they care about is attacking Israel. Their whole idea of life is war. And they got $2 billion originally for reparations to rebuild Gaza, and they used it to build the tunnels. They hired thousands of Palestinians to work underground building these things, and then Israel has to blow them up because they find openings in the middle of wheat fields and things like that, or trying to come up under buildings that they can actually tunnel in under a large building, a kibbutz on the border, to try to take hostages. And when I had talked with Colonel Richard Kemp, who was from the UK and was a commander in Afghanistan, he told me that inside of the tunnels, the Hamas tunnels, he's very savvy on these things, so I was really interested in what he had to say. And he was saying that they found hypodermic needles with sedatives and dirt bikes so they could inject their hostages, put them to sleep, and then speed them to the other end of the tunnel, so they would end up having hostages in Gaza that would be very hard for Israel to rescue. But so far, they haven't been successful doing that. Thank God.
Thank God. The IDF is on top of it. They take
Yes, they are.
They take it seriously, and I think America should take it more seriously. Trump has given more money to build up the military, like Reagan did with Star Wars, which is a must, because that's the only thing that's going to deter a satanic enemy that only has a lust for blood and to kill you, is to have a very strong military to deter them. It's the only language they understand. And I wish more would have the common sense that the IDF have. They guard their schools and their children. They send the military out there, and every school is guarded. And duh, why is everybody so stupid here in America, and why isn't this implemented? Is it because of socialism, New World Order, leftist weirdo to destroy your own country?
I don't have any explanation for that other than that. I think that there's a very evil cabal of people that are working against us to try to skew what the mainstream media puts out. It's a worldwide problem right now, though. I mean, it's not just here in the States, but we hear about an activist jailed in London, and there's a complete media blackout on it. You can't discuss it, talk about it. Even Fox had to pull the story. I mean, people are afraid of getting sued. And so what this new group does is basically use finances to destroy people. You have to get legal counsel to basically defend yourself, and it's so expensive to do that you can't afford to get involved in these squabbles. And that's how they're controlling the population, is monetarily. And it's always been that way, but never to the extent that it currently is. And like you've experienced, Leah, with YouTube, if they don't like what you're talking about, they will clamp off all of your hits. So it looks like you've only gotten a few hundred hits. Now, I've had that happen. I have a completely harmless project up on YouTube called the Words Project. And it had to do with famous rappers and musicians who wanted to rap the words of Christ, came to us wanting to do it. We presented the idea, and they all wanted to do it. And once one of them started and word got out who was involved with the project, we had a string of people waiting in line at my studio wanting to come discuss it with me because they wanted to be part of it. So it wasn't like we were bending anyone's arm to do it. I mean, these were big groups. Two Live Crew, which at one time was huge, as you might remember. The Bone Thugs and Harmony. These are, of course, not going to be groups that Christian groups are probably even going to know about, but we hung out together and became really good friends through this process. I've met Snoop, I've met all of these people, and basically I put this whole film, an hour-long film, up on YouTube for free in HD with all of these major stars and street kids from South Central. And it's really a cool film, and it's gotten 13,000 hits, and it's stayed at that number for the past 3 years. Now, that's just not possible. Because
it isn't
I have
possible.
an interview that I shot with Lazy Bone and his parents, which I saw it today at something like, I forget the exact number, don't quote me on this, but it was something like 160, 190,000 hits, that one little quoted thing, because it didn't really talk about Jesus or anything like that. It was just basically Lazy introducing his family to the world, and he let me record it. And, I love Lazy. He's a great guy. So that got all these hits. And so then the video that we did with him and Busy Bone and Flash and all the rest of the group gets 13,000 hits. That makes no sense. Makes no sense at all.
No,
There's
it doesn't.
been manipulation going on. So I'm looking for new platforms, and basically this has hurt us financially in an enormous way. We're probably making 10% of the money we used to make, and we can't go on that way. So that's why the Gaza piece, I'm trying something I've never tried before. I'm charging for this film. It's a 21-minute expose on what's really going on in Gaza with all these key people that we've mentioned. And I'm charging $1.25, which is basically what iTunes charges for a single song. And I'm doing basically an original video with all of this information in it for the same price. And I need a few thousand people to get online and buy it, and spread the news about this. 1, so that it will help Israel. 2, so that it will help us continue to do this kind of work, because it's expensive. And 3, to keep us from losing our house and all of that. So we're working on things to try to keep everybody afloat and tell the truth about what's going on in Israel and other places that we're affected by. So watch The Truth About Gaza on Vimeo VOD, and you can find the link at my website at pinlight.com. And I'm sure, Leah, you're happy to put up any links to help us that you can, and I appreciate it, and we'll say thanks in advance for doing it.
Rick, I'm really glad you came on, and our audience has a more in-depth understanding of what's really taking place at the borderlines with Hamas, what they're trying to do to Israel, what this is all about. It's more insight than just your typical news article. And these are from people who are experts in the field, who deal with it at a long time. And I think you'll enjoy his video. You can go to his site, pinlight.com, to search for it. I think it's on your Vimeo under Richard Shaw, isn't it?
Well, if you go to the About page, there's a graphic for it, and if you just click on that, it'll take you to the Vimeo page, and the trailer is free. And you watch the trailer and see if it is of interest to you, and then to watch the whole piece, it's $1.25. Back in 2008, I was asked to come to Israel to basically film various locations for this pastor that I had met through my friend Lee Canelon. And he needed a shooter to come and film him reading in various locations. So the project was not all that creative, but it allowed me to get to Israel and meet some people. Well, he had a Palestinian friend in Bethlehem. And I wrote that up in my latest article that I sent you, Leah. But basically, this guy had a really cool store that had sacred art that he'd carved. Their family does these incredible carvings of the Last Supper and of Yeshua and angels. And I mean, these are really elaborate wooden carvings that people take home as souvenirs from Israel. They're beautiful, and some of them are expensive. And so he took us to dinner, and one of the things that he served was, "Oh, we're having birds tonight." I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Oh, it's a delicacy." And he brings out this circular dish that has all these little heads sticking out of the top, and you basically pull on them, and it's an entire bird that's been grilled, and you pop the whole thing in your mouth and eat it. It's a little crunchy, but it was pretty tasty the way they prepared it. But these were Palestinians, and one of the guys at the table was Yasser Arafat's former bodyguard. We were having dinner with. So I've hung out with Palestinians. I've hung out with Arabs. I have nothing against them. There are good ones and bad ones, just like there are here in America. There's good people and bad people. And the Palestinians are being treated horribly by Hamas. They're being completely abused and used. And some of them don't realize it. Some of them, they train their kids to hate Israel right from when they're 5. It's horrible, really, what they're doing to these people. And yet, I've driven through, all over Israel, and I've seen Palestinian territories, and they're always underdeveloped. Once they're given this land, they don't know what to do with it. They're burning trash in the middle of the street. There are graffiti all over the walls. This is just what has happened in Jericho. And, they built a huge casino at one time in Jericho. That was their big improvement project that they did. And then later we discovered that they were shooting at IDF soldiers through the windows of this giant casino hotel. And they were using it as a way to plant snipers and kill IDF soldiers. And so, from what I've heard, the IDF put a missile right through the building, and that was that. So they couldn't do that anymore. But that's the kind of people that Israel has to deal with. People that will just shoot at you at random from a building. And this happened years ago in Tel Aviv. There's a tower in Tel Aviv where there were Arabs killing Jews randomly just walking through town. We're doing nothing. I've seen that tower. I know it exists. And but people don't know that stuff is happening. And yet I don't feel unsafe when I go to Israel. And yet when we sit down at a table to eat dinner with one of our friends, Sarah, her name's Sarah Golan. There's a couple Sarahs here that I'm talking about, but they had commented that they had a missile that they'd captured, and I said, "Oh, cool, bring it in. I want to see it." And the kid brings in a complete nose cone to an Iron Dome rocket. And I'm going, this isn't your normal thing that happens, around the dinner table. And he planted it right in the middle of the table where we could all see it and look at it. And it was an Iron Dome missile that exploded and taken out a Hamas rocket, and they were allowed to keep it. And the Iron Dome parts are beautifully made. Everything's beautifully recessed and all that. And it's not meant to hurt anybody. It's meant to protect Israel from the rockets flying in. So what the Iron Dome does, these rockets are shot off from Israeli territory. They go up in the air, they seek out the missile coming in, and then they blow up next to it to take out the missile. That's how it works. It's really sophisticated. They have to do wind speed measurements. It's all computer controlled. It's amazing technology. But that's what Israel does. That's their thing. They have brilliant minds there to create this kind of stuff. And it's always in an effort to protect the country unless they get fired at or, someone, and Scripture tells us that in the end of days, Israel will become a burdensome stone to the surrounding communities. And that's really what's happening. They can't move Jerusalem. It's immovable. And no matter what they do, Israel might get hurt and crushed on the edges a little bit, but it's not going to be destroyed. I don't think God is going to allow that to happen.
I agree with you, Rick. I've often spoken the scripture. You kicking against a thorn bush when you're kicking against Israel. He said, Israel shall not be moved. And the very pit, and I want to warn people about this, you need to be careful. The very pit that you dig for someone else, for their demise, you yourself will fall into it. And so Israel's not going to fall into that pit. Inevitably, she will be saved because he's made a covenant with Israel. But this goes in general, people. You let God take revenge. You let God handle things, because when you start to plot someone's demise and plot to hurt people, you're going to fall into that pit. And you can take it as a warning, because you probably won't hear this preached at your local churches anymore. But I hope that you take it to heart and share that message. Listen, the information that Rick gave today is, you can't put a price tag on it. I mean, these are people that he's interacted with, and he himself, like I said, were right there. They're involved. They deeply understand and know the situation. So it's been expert news today. Thank you for taking your time to be with us today, Rick.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it, to help me get the message out on this, because we're just trying to help Israel, the only democratic state in the entire Middle East and ally of the United States. And I look at it that way, first of all, and then also for its antiquity and its history that is so important to all of us. We wouldn't have our Bibles unless it was because of Israel. And we wouldn't know about Yeshua if it hadn't been for Israel. So those things are deeply ingrained in us, and we're not there to have some sort of jihad. That's not our approach. I mean, that's not what we've been taught. We've been taught to love people. And that's a completely 180 degrees opposed to the Islamic point of view. And now it's getting so where you're almost going, in some countries like the UK, they can arrest you for basically opposing the Islamic point of view. It's really weird. I mean, here we are in London, in the epicenter of Winston Churchill's courage and bravery during World War II, and it's becoming an Islamist state. It's really bizarre. I mean, if someone had told me that 20 years ago, I would have thought they were nuts. I wouldn't have believed it. But that's what's happening currently. And if you speak out against it, they arrest you. So that's kind of scary. I mean, that's kind of frightening. And it could happen here. So I think we have limited time to do the kind of things that we're doing right now. These important moments that we have to do this, and to actually tell the truth and show people what the truth is, and reasonably reason out the facts of a situation instead of just believing everything the news media tells us, is where we have to be at this point. And what you're doing is so important, Leah, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yours is equally as important, Rick, and I'm just thankful for the opportunity to share this on all our many platforms throughout the social sites and different medias and podcasts and radio. Thank you so much, Rick. Until next week, I'm Leah, reminding you that God loves you.